Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman alongside Morgan Campbell, back from the Windy City, so let's ring this bell. A absolutely huge week in the sport of boxing. Almost too busy for us to even keep up with.
Yes.
We had 4 PBC shows. We have a major pay-per-view that happened on the weekend, so we have a ton to get to. Both of us were in Chicago over the weekend.
Yes, we were.
We did not cross paths.
No, that's why. Interesting story, because Corey was there with the PBC show. I was there for the 20-year reunion of the Rose Bowl team, of which I played like the tiniest of parts. But there are some boxing parallels. First of all, my big brother on the team, Chris Rooney, he is like a seniors division, like a masters division Chicago Golden Gloves champ. Remember when we went to Detroit and we watched Jellion Love versus Derek Finley?
Yes.
And Chris is like, Derek Finley, I know Derek Finley. He broke my nose in the amateurs. And then another time, because I went to Northwestern, we are probably the best nerd school football program out there. We beat Stanford this year. We beat Duke. Nerd school football, but even in nerd school college football, the kickers are still the nerds among the nerds. So needless to say, I was a wide receiver, but I got along very well with the kickers on the team. So I was catching up with a kicker named Shannon Jones. He's done a little acting, but, we were talking about this show, and he says, I used to be in boxing. I was a promoter. I was like, what? Tell me about it. And what Shannon was doing in California was they were trying to find the next great American heavyweight.
He was the heavyweight factory.
Well, yeah.
Before the heavyweight factory.
Heavyweight factory West. But
yes.
Because Shannon had all these connections in the corporate world, and he got all these people to help underwrite this thing. And he said, they had basically guys between 20 and 23 who had played other sports, and what a lot of these guys, they would come over from football, most of them, and a lot of them talked a great game, but once they got hit, it was a different story.
Right.
Their prized pupil was a football player, former college football player, who couldn't run a 40 to save his life, this is what Shannon said to me, but had tremendous spatial acuity. Do you want to know that man's name?
Hit me.
Dominic Brazil.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Okay, so this all ties back to like 3 episodes ago.
Yes.
Interesting.
The world is tiny.
No kidding.
Yes.
Yeah. There was somewhat of a football connection with my trip as well. I don't know. I didn't even know, and I've worked with Scott Hansen a couple times. He played football at Syracuse, and I think he probably played like in your era as well. So there might have been some.
What year did he graduate?
I'd have to look that up.
Because we're the best journalism nerd school football team too. Once every now and then we'll play Syracuse and they call it the Broadcast Bowl.
Right, yeah.
Medill School of Journalism versus whatever School of Journalism, Newhouse I think it's called.
Yeah.
But we're the reigning champs there too.
We all wind up in the same place.
Exactly.
There we go. All right, so yes, I was there for the PBC show. We'll get there a little bit later on. We will start with Golovkin and Lemieux. I got back just in time because my flight was delayed.
Yes.
And I landed just in time to sprint to a local sports bar where, and again, this could be an indication of the popularity of the pay-per-view. It could be an indication of the popularity of the establishment.
Yes.
Or of the poor advertising that the establishment did to let people know that the pay-per-view was there. But all I can tell you is that I watched that pay-per-view sitting at the bar with 9 people in the bar, and I would say 8 of them were watching the pay-per-view. So again, that could be an indication of any number of things when it comes to this pay-per-view or the establishment, which is why I'm not saying the establishment's name, but that's what happened. I watched with 8 people.
But again, this is what HBO and Golovkin's backers are confronting, right? Is that they're trying to set this guy up as the next big pay-per-view rainmaker. This is a pay-per-view debut. We can talk in a minute about the numbers they did, but I don't think, matched the pay-per-view headliner debut numbers of previous pay-per-view rainmaker superstar.
Well, we might as well mention that. And again, we don't know the validity of these numbers as of yet, but as of the time that we started recording this, the only numbers that had been reported, and they could be valid, they could not be, but Fight Hype was reporting that a source told them 150,000 buys. So that would be just south of the 200,000 number that we were talking about last week,
right,
at which everyone would have been happy financially and everyone would have made money. Now, I don't know that 200,000 was necessarily the break-even point. So this could still be profitable. It could still be fine financially for them.
Nobody on this card is making $30 million.
No.
You don't have that big expense off the top.
No, but we do find out, I think, if the numbers are that or anywhere near it, that, and I think that HBO even conceded this on the broadcast, that Triple G is going to need Cotto or Canelo to have a real blockbuster pay-per-view. There's no, and that's not even necessarily Triple G's fault, because there's no one at middleweight that can challenge him.
Right.
He'll have to move up.
It's not like he had a super marketable B-side, but for Golovkin's part, he did what he was supposed to do.
Yes.
He won that fight in a one-sided manner. Was it short and explosive? No, it was more methodical. And for the people who watch boxing, intermittently and aren't into the subtlety and don't quite understand that every fight's not going to unfold the same way, maybe they were disappointed. Oh, it took them, because again, they've been told, everything, like while we're dealing with fabricated, quote unquote, Russian stereotypes. Again, they've been told, like Drago, everything he hits, he destroys. But it took him 9 rounds to break down Lemieux. For the people who had been primed to see him just walk through David Lemieux in 1 or 2 or 3 rounds, maybe that's a disappointment. But Golovkin was so many levels above Lemieux. Not to say that he carried Lemieux, but this is a predictable result, terribly one-sided result. But again, he's supposed to dominate. He dominated. And if you thought that he was just gonna that Lemieux was just gonna disintegrate after 1 or 2 punches, well, it's because you've been primed the wrong way.
Yeah.
And had kind of unrealistic expectations going into the fight. The fight was what we kind of expected it to be. Lemieux's tough and he's willing, just not skilled enough to give Golovkin any headaches.
And if you were one of those people who were going into it blind and hoping for just a thrashing in the opening few rounds, maybe you were disappointed. But if you did go into it knowing what to expect, if you were one of the educated boxing fans who had seen Triple G before, I think you were very impressed with Triple G. And we talked last week in the preview about how this would be a fight, perhaps, where we would finally learn something new about Triple G. And although I don't think the lesson, so to speak, was that gigantic, I think we did learn that, hey, this is someone who can take his time, who can box on the outside, who can be a little bit more upright. We knew he had a great jab. We knew he had a very active jab, but simply with his left hand alone was able to wipe David Lemieux out of this fight completely, because Lemieux didn't have a way in the front door. He had no other ideas.
Well, no. And you saw Golovkin tighten up his defense a little bit, because there's that one sequence where they both threw left hooks simultaneously, and
he only got hit with maybe 2 of them in the entire fight. And you could tell too that Lemieux wasn't willing to commit the same way that he was, say, against a Hassan Endam. When he'll totally take that shot and stand in there and throw his own. He was clearly not willing to do that against Triple G, because he knew the repercussions of doing so.
Well, yeah, because 2 things. One, you saw on that simultaneous left hook, you saw Golovkin keep his right hand tight to his cheek, so his left hook lands, because Lemieux's right hand is kind of wayward, and Lemieux's right hand just hits Golovkin's glove. So you saw Golovkin pay a little bit more to defense, because both these guys kind of had the same thing going on. They were both cognizant of the fact that they're facing a guy who hits as hard as he does, or harder than he does. So it's not, as to your point, it's not worth it to go in there and just recklessly trade for either guy, right? So you see Golovkin pay a little more attention to defense than he has in the past. And you see Lemieux saying, hey, wait a minute, I can't just run in here and trade. Getting hit by Endam is one thing. Getting hit by Gennady Golovkin is something completely different. So to the extent that Lemieux is capable of choosing his shots, that's what he tried to do. But that's not who David Lemieux is. And that was why the fight ended the way it did.
Yeah, and I think this is a reminder, and we'll hit the break in just a moment to talk about this a little bit more on the other side, but this is a reminder too. People see these highlight reels of Triple G just steamrolling through guys. You forget that this is an Olympic medalist.
Yes.
And you forget that there's a whole lot of nuance to his offense and whatnot. We'll talk a little bit more about his defense and some of the things we were saying about it last week on the other side of the break. But offensively, just when we talk to boxing trainers now, they're showing their kids tapes of Triple G because there's not a lot that you can find that he does technically wrong.
No.
Basically, he does everything technically perfect.
Yes.
And you see that especially when he can take apart a guy like David Lemieux with such ease the way that he did on Saturday night. We're going to hit the break real quick. We'll come back and talk more about Triple G and David Lemieux, as well as Chocolatito and plenty more. So stick with us right here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. We do want to mention, by the way, that today in the office we had some cake because it was apparently the 10th anniversary of Fight Network. That's also why I'm wearing this grossly oversized sweater that says 10 years on here.
There was no cake for me because my day job is not in this office.
Yeah, exactly.
With
so happy
Star Touch.
Happy 10-year anniversary to everyone around here.
Happy anniversary. I'll be here drinking water to celebrate.
And, we had our theme around here is sort of early 90s and whatnot, so we didn't have form-fitting sweaters back then, hence the gigantism on this sweater. On the previous side of the break, we were talking about Triple G and David Lemieux. We were giving our praises to Triple G for his performance. Obviously, a whole lot to say. I don't know if we need to turn our microphones up or whatever, but there still seems to be this idea that we're Triple G haters on this program. And there were even people in the comments section last week, and I don't even know why I'm reading, but apparently...
Why do you read the YouTube?
Hey, sometimes it's amusing.
Listen, and I appreciate even the negative feedback because you're still engaging with us.
Sure.
But I thought it was pretty well established that YouTube comments...
they're poison.
Newspaper article comments that kill brain cells. Man.
Yeah. You know what else would kill brain cells? If you and I got in the ring and fought Triple G. But apparently someone in the comment section last week was like, the Triple G would fold either of these guys up with a body shot. Of course he would. At what point did I say I wanted to fight Gennady Golovkin? When did that ever come out? That when have I ever said I'm a professional fighter or I think I'm better than Gennady Golovkin or anyone?
I bet I could write better than Gennady Golovkin.
Certainly.
So then
that's about it.
But I'm going
to stay in my lane.
But there's no type of reciprocal challenge.
Right.
Ending.
Yeah.
Hey Golovkin, let's see how well you can write, and then afterwards I'll fight you. No. And
that never happened. It never happened.
You know what? Unless the ghost of Sugar Ray Robinson is writing YouTube comments, then Gennady Golovkin can beat up anybody in YouTube comments too, simultaneously or in sequence.
Of course. But last week we talked about what we determined was basically a myth of Golovkin in previous fights just voluntarily getting punched. That's not to say that maybe you aren't a little bit more careful in a fight like against David Lemieux. But it still doesn't mean that you stick that you're voluntarily getting hit, or that you're like a pro wrestler and can determine with the snap of your fingers when this fight ends. No. Why is it that in boxing, and part of what makes boxing fun is that romanticism, but for some reason in boxing, a fighter can't be great without being superhuman. Yes. I feel like all of these people would have loved, or would love right now, to go back and read books about like Negro League baseball. Because I think they are the same people who truly believe that Josh Gibson hit a fly ball that landed the next day in Pittsburgh. Yes. Or that Cool Papa Bell hit a ground ball and slid into second and hit his own line drive and hit his own line drive, sliding into second base.
Or that Satchel Paige threw the pitch that disappeared.
That's right. All of these things.
Well, you guys think David Price is good? Did David Price ever throw a pitch that disappeared?
No way. No way.
Then he's a scrb.
I just don't get it. Why can't a great fighter just be great? I don't know why we have to have such insane hyperbole.
Well, this is also, a byproduct of this culture, of the YouTube culture that prioritizes the highlight film. Because with the highlight film, anything that's boring or not complimentary, you can just edit out. I mean, there's YouTube, there's copies of the Mayweather Judah fight on YouTube that will have you thinking that Zab Judah won that fight.
Yes.
Because you can just edit out here. You can boil everything down to just the highlights.
Yeah, here's the 120 punches that landed.
And
here we go.
You don't see anything else. And, and the truth is, with fighters, Golovkin's not the only fighter that does this. Lots of fighters, whether they're good defensive fighters, great defensive fighters, solid defensive fighters, but they all kind of make that calculation.
The level of danger.
How much damage am I willing to risk to get my offense off? If I could get hurt, well, I'm going to tighten up the defense, and I'm not going to trade as much. And Golovkin did it. Lemieux did it. It's just that Lemieux isn't as skilled defensively as Golovkin is, so Lemieux's way of managing that risk was just not to trade as much, whereas Golovkin tightened up the defense in ways that he didn't have to against Willie Monroe. It doesn't mean he was just voluntarily letting Willie Monroe
exactly.
hit him.
That is what boxing strategy is.
Right.
Exactly. There's a difference.
How much am I willing to stand in the pocket, stand in the mouth of the cannon to get my offense off? Because if I can really get hurt, I'm not going to take that risk. If I don't think I'm going to get hurt, I'll take that risk.
But as soon as you change the verbiage and say like he's getting hit on purpose or he's purposely extending this fight or something like that, then we're telling lies. That's something different.
That is something different. That's again, it's like the pitcher.
That's masochism.
It's like the pitcher throwing the fastball. If I got a bunch of singles hitters, am I going to throw more fastballs? Yeah, why not? But if I got, and even though the Blue Jays are getting smashed as we discussed,
right?
But if I have Bautista then Encarnacion, am I going to throw a whole bunch of fastballs and challenge every hitter? No, because that's suicide. And boxers do the exact same thing. Can I challenge this fighter on the inside? It's funny because Mayweather's kind of become the poster child for this fighter that's the risk-averse fighter. Doesn't want to risk his doesn't want to risk getting hit in the ring. But again, if you watch fights from if you watch the Mayweather Corley fight, you watch how Mayweather fought that fight and listen to what Jim Lampley said about Mayweather after that fight. He's going to have to temper this aggressiveness if he wants to last in this business.
Yeah.
This is what Jim Lampley said about Floyd Mayweather. But at 140 pounds, Floyd Mayweather said, you know what? It's worth the risk. And I'll assume this risk to get my offense off. I'll still fight kind of defensively, but if I get hit a few times, it's not going to hurt me to the point where I can't keep going. Whereas at welterweight, where the guy's hit harder, he said, hey, wait a minute. I'm going to have to manage this risk even more. Again, Golovkin, Lemieux were each doing the same thing, just in their way, according to their skills.
And at a completely different level. Yes, exactly. So we found out sort of what we knew. I don't think there's no one at 160 that's going to beat Triple G.
No.
And I include Canelo and Cotto in that. I don't think they are going to be able to beat Triple G.
Because neither of those guys is tall.
Right.
So these guys are going to be like the blown up, muscle bound 160 pounder who is strong, physically strong, weight room strong, but not necessarily a hard puncher at that weight. And if you're not a hard puncher at 160 pounds, what incentive does Golovkin have to do something different than what he's done to everybody?
Yep, exactly.
Very little.
Coming up on the other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about the main undercard fight there. Chocolatito taking on Brian Viloria. Another great performance from Chocolatito. Then we'll get into a pair of Fight of the Year contenders from Chicago on PBC. And eventually we'll get to this weekend's HBO card as well. It is the return of Terrence Crawford taking on our Canadian boy, Thierry Jean, in what could be an interesting fight, but it also could not be. We'll talk about that and plenty more when we return on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. We mentioned we were going to talk about Chocolatito Gonzalez's HBO debut, or HBO pay-per-view debut, in his stoppage win over Brian Viloria. An impressive win for people who hadn't seen Chocolatito before. I'm sure that they were impressed with the performance. We got a really good fight out of it. Brian Viloria did touch him a couple times too, and maybe hurt him in that final round before he eventually got stopped himself. But in that fight, Morgan, this kind of ties into what we were talking about.
I still haven't seen the fight.
That's right.
I was out doing homecoming things.
Yeah, you didn't get back in time.
Right. I saw Golovkin Lemieux, but by the time I tried to find this fight on YouTube, it was gone.
Yes.
HBO moves quickly.
Yes, they do.
So I'll have to watch it this week in the lead up to Bud Crawford versus Dairy Doogie style.
Doogie style, yes, that's right. Yeah, doggy style. That's a different
connotation.
Different guy from Quebec.
Yes.
Speaking of YouTube, in that fight, and we were talking about this before, Jim Lampley referenced a YouTube video, which I know you've seen in the past. It is a fan-made YouTube video by a gentleman named Lee Wiley called The Art of Moving.
Yes.
And it is breaking down the techniques of Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. And Jim Lampley on the broadcast was enamored with this video. And this sort of ties into what we were talking about with Golovkin, because basically this video, as you remember it, Morgan, is basically, just a 12-minute sort of long drawn-out illustration of the fact that Chocolatito moves his feet in the ring.
Yes.
Which is something that every boxer does.
Yes.
But not every boxer gets the 12-minute video treatment of it with, police report speak layered over top of it as well. So it makes everything that Choc
speak is as many words as possible. Use 8 words when 3 will suffice, and use 5-syllable words when 2 syllables will suffice. Abrasions and contusions.
It is the antithesis of great boxing writer Ernest Hemingway.
Yes.
Let's say, yes.
And the amazing thing about this video, and the amazing thing about the fact that Lampley references it, is that the video doesn't tell us anything about Gonzalez that you wouldn't know by watching Gonzalez. And the difference, what we learn about this video in Gonzalez, what we don't learn about this video in Gonzalez and about boxing is whether or not other boxers do that stuff too. Because the video and Lampley's referencing of the video make it seem like Gonzalez is the only boxer that does these things, and he's not. He just does them better than everyone else.
At a higher speed, more effectively,
right,
yes.
Which are 2 completely different discussions, right? Because every sport has people who are fundamentally sound, and then you have the guys that do things better than everyone else, and that's what makes them better than everyone else. But it's not the fact that a basketball player dribbles the basketball with his fingertips as opposed to his palm that makes him a great basketball player. Everyone's taught that from day one. Catch the ball with your hands and not your body if you're a football player. Great. We're all taught that. But how do you implement these things in a way that make you better than everyone else? And that's not what the video tells us. The video, again, it's maybe good for people that have never watched boxing.
Yeah.
And again, this is the impression I get, is that there are guys that haven't watched a lot of boxing, maybe come from an MMA background, and have been taught that boxing is just something that you pay cursory attention to, perfunctory attention to on the way to getting a takedown or something like that. But then when you sit down and watch boxing, you're like, holy smokes, this is an entire sport unto itself. Yes, it is. And again, all these practitioners implement these fundamentals, but Chocolatito does it better, and that's what makes him better. And it's not just the fact that he does it, it's the fact that he does it better than other people.
Yes, which again, as you alluded to, makes it interesting as to why Lampley himself would reference this on the broadcast. Is it because they're trying to appeal to very casual fans who are maybe tuning into this pay-per-view, who are just getting into it, and hey, watching something like this will make Chocolatito very fascinating. If your knowledge of the sport is very elementary, then watching that would probably get you very excited about Chocolatito. But is that why he's doing it, or is Jim Lampley doing that because he himself didn't see these things in Chocolatito and wasn't aware of the existence of Chocolatito before he fought Edgar Sosa as well? I don't know.
Yeah, and neither can I. I can't speak for Jim Lampley. But again, it's just I'm confused that. And I'm a big Chocolatito guy, but again, we don't have to make him into something that he isn't. And let's not. It reminds me again of this New York Times article about Manny Pacquiao during the at peak Pacquiao.
Yes,
where the writer Greg Bishop is a fantastic writer, but again, you can tell the people who haven't watched a lot of boxing until a certain point, because in this article, Manny Pacquiao and Freddie Roach are credited with inventing angles. That before Manny Pacquiao came along, all boxing took place just in a linear plane. Yeah. It was like fencing.
Mike Tyson.
Straightforward. Not even Mike Tyson.
Like Nintendo, sort of.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, but I guess you could move laterally in Nintendo. That's right.
But before Manny Pacquiao came along, all boxing took place straight line forward and back. Whereas, watching 10 seconds of any boxing match can tell you that's
from any era.
Right.
But yeah.
So what Manny Pacquiao did was employ angles better than most of his peers did, which makes him very different from being the first guy ever to say, what happens if I step off the center line? 2 very different things.
Right.
Because I bet Tom Molyneux stepped off the center line back.
Sure he did, yeah.
Back in England
after eating a
1795.
boiled foal and
Right.
a whole pie before stepping in the ring.
Exactly. Stepped off the center line to deliver his hammer fist.
And that's totally fine. And that's, that is a totally fair way to approach the story as well, because you and I delve into different sports all the time as well.
Yes.
And when I first had to call steeplechase, you got to go back and you sort of study these things.
Yes.
And a lot of these things that are very basic to steeplechasers,
right,
were particularly fascinating to me.
Yes.
And now that I've gone on and followed it a little bit more, these things become normal. They become commonplace.
Right.
So that's what I think this video is for people who are out there. If you've watched Chocolatito, nothing in that video is going to surprise you.
Yes.
If you watch boxing a whole lot, nothing in that video is going to surprise you. He slides back and throws an uppercut.
Right.
Lots of people do that. But again, does it at a higher level than maybe anyone else in the sport.
Yes.
And, I consider Chocolatito to be the best fighter in the sport, or number one or number two. So we are not Chocolatito haters either.
No,
He's once again the number one fighter in the sport, in my opinion. I want to make that clear.
And again, this has... when you hear us criticize stuff, it has nothing to do with the fighter. It just has more to do with the fairy tales that people create around these fighters that in a lot of ways do a disservice to the fighter.
Yeah. And it creates sort of a resentment towards the fighter.
Yes.
What makes people angrier in sports than the overhyped guy?
Yeah. And again, that's not the fighter's fault.
Exactly.
You create the hype around
if anything, we're doing a service to these fighters.
Yes.
We're eliminating that crazy aura of hype so that people can evaluate these guys properly.
Exactly. Like when Gennady Golovkin landed, when he sank the seated 3-point shot in the driveway.
Yes.
It took a few takes, guys. It's okay.
I'm sorry to break it to you.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's not Gennady Golovkin.
Still means that he beat the stuffing out of David Lemieux.
Yes, he's still one of the top 2 or 3 pound-for-pound fighters on the planet. Might be half a notch below Chocolatito, but that's not anyone's fault.
Well, speaking of rankings, coming up on the other side of the break, we'll talk about Para Fight of the Year contenders. We'll see where they rank, at least in our list thus far. And then we're going to get into Terrence Crawford, who is taking on Dear Regent on HBO this weekend. Plenty to get to, so stick with us right here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. As mentioned, I was ringside for PBC in Chicago as part of the Spike TV broadcast, and a privilege to be a part of that one because that might have been the best card on American television all year long. We had Koki Kameda and Kohei Kono in a super flyweight title fight, and we had Andrew Fonfara and Nathan Cleverly in a light heavyweight, called an eliminator, so to speak, in the main event. Both of them Fight of the Year contenders, both of them shattering CompuBox records back-to-back. It'll be pretty tough to beat this card. For all the people who hate PBC out there, there's no disputing that this was an excellent show.
I still haven't seen the Kameda fight. The Cleverly Fonfara fight was absolute insanity.
Yes.
From the beginning to the end. What's interesting is that the viewership was at an all-time low. And it says a lot about the habits of fight spectators, hardcore and mainstream, and again, especially the mainstream. Because again, what it tells you more than anything is that mainstream sports fans don't watch fights for action. What they watch is a person. Because again, they will watch Mayweather and Pacquiao, and then when that disappoints, they say, hey man, that fight was disappointing. Well, Mayweather-Pacquiao was never going to be Cleverly Fonfara, but Cleverly Fonfara was always going to be Cleverly Fonfara. But when that fight happened, you didn't pay attention because you were watching something else. But then you turn around and say, well, boxing is boring. Where are the good matchups? They're there. You're just not always watching.
Exactly.
Because there are different cues, different triggers that get you to watch a fight. And potential for action isn't necessarily one of them.
leads people into a couple different directions, a couple different ideas, and it's usually, well, we're not getting the competitive matchups. In this case, we did get the competitive matchups. We got an excellent fight that you would have never seen on American TV before now. And then you got Cleverly Funfaro, which, again, on paper was always going to be a volume puncher's dream. They were there for you. So the low rating or whatever the rating was, I think we're hearing like 350,000 or something like that, had nothing to do with the quality of this card. No. If you want to say it's because there were 3 other PBC cards throughout the week and you kind of had to pick and choose,
except you don't, because they weren't on at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like saying, well, I didn't watch the baseball game on Saturday because there was a baseball game on Wednesday.
Listen, we're in the middle of college football season.
Yes.
And we're in the middle of playoff baseball. When PBC started and, we saw the big numbers, number one, the product was new. And there's always going to be an inherent curiosity the first time anything's on any new platform. That's always going to be there. So you're going to get good ratings usually out of the gate. But also, we're in the middle of early playoff hockey, which doesn't do great numbers in the United States.
Early playoff hockey, late playoff hockey, midseason hockey.
Exactly.
None of these do great ratings.
Means nothing. And very early regular season baseball with a lot of people, which a lot of people don't watch at all. They start watching now.
Right.
So those things factor in there. And I do want to point out that for Spike shows, they're on a delay on the West Coast.
Right.
So that West Coast, which in some cases is a hotbed for boxing fandom, that's why a lot of fights are on the West Coast, don't factor into these ratings as well. So that has something to do with these particular numbers.
And I'm also wondering, because I didn't see that fight live, so I don't know what the social media impact was. But occasionally, when there's a fight on HBO or on Showtime, and it's really exciting in the early rounds, you'll see people.
It'll be a trending topic.
Yeah, and you'll see in your top 10. Start tweeting, "Hey man, put it on Showtime. Great fight going on right now." And I don't know if that happened during the Friday fights on PBC, but these are the types of things that make a difference, even if it's incremental to the size of your audience. But it's with fights like that, the matchup and the quality of the product wasn't the impediment to viewership, but there might be an impediment in terms of marketing and getting the word out before the fight and during the fight.
Sure.
And again, it's a question of figuring out what triggers people to watch fights. Is it really the action? To what extent is it the action? Will people spend the time to watch the action if the right person is fighting? But again, there's very little relationship between the size of an audience and the action that takes place during the fight. But in that way, it's not different from any other sport.
No.
A lot of times, the most exciting football game
it was like Conference USA,
right?
Some
on small
wherever
title game
on CBS Sports,
Division II title game that's only seen locally, and it's a lot more exciting than the Super Bowl. But again, the Super Bowl isn't seen as a final referendum on whether or not the sport of football is worth watching.
Yes.
So if the Super Bowl is boring, or if the Super Bowl is a mismatch, people don't say, well, we need to forget football completely because the Super Bowl was a mismatch. You kind of understand that it's a sport, and overall the sport is worth watching. And this is, again, what hardcore boxing fans and mainstream boxing fans have trouble kind of coming to a consensus on.
Well, and maybe this is wishful thinking, but in the case of a card like this where you have 2 really great fights, and especially the light heavyweight fight, sometimes, again, maybe wishful thinking, but sometimes fights like this serve as an investment of sorts. If you remember, Corrales-Castillo didn't do great ratings.
Yes.
The first Gotti Ward didn't do the best ratings for HBO either, but after they happened, there was this groundswell of people saying, hey, you got to watch this fight. And then the replay sort of really got people enamored with this fight. And then the next time around, they really wanted to watch Gotti and Ward and Corrales and Castillo. And maybe that happens with Funfaro and Cleverly, maybe not, but there is something there, and maybe PBC and Spike can do something with it. I already have heard whispers of re-airing this as part of like a best of the year type of thing, along with the Huck Lavochky fight.
Yes.
And maybe that helps them down the road.
They should re-air it or see if they can make a rematch.
Yeah.
And one of the things that helps,
if Cleverly has anything left after that, by the way. If he has anything left.
Well, one of the things that helps too is, having the audience in the first place, because when we're talking about Spike, combat sports on Spike, one of the things that really helped put the UFC over was that they had the reality show that led up to the Ultimate Fighter finale, and then they had that crazy fight between Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin, which was as action-packed of an MMA fight as cleverly Funfara was as a boxing match. So you had this audience tuned in. They saw this really exciting fight. Now, did that fight represent what most MMA fights are? Absolutely not. But
nor does this for boxing.
Right. But you had an audience. You had them hooked. And for these people that again, see every single fight as a referendum on whether or not the sport is worthy of your attention. For the people who first tuned into MMA and saw that fight told them that this fight is worth watching, even if they have to watch 1,000 more fights to see another one as exciting as that one. So this fight could have benefited from, some better marketing beforehand, or on the back end could benefit from a re-airing. Because again, for the people that don't watch it a lot and they see something that's that exciting, whether or not the next 1,000 fights are that exciting, you'll think that there's a possibility that they can be.
Well, and at the end of the show, we are going to give you our YouTube picks yes. of the week, but I will give you an additional one to put a bow on this. When PBC legally uploads this one, because I'm not in the business of losing my job, definitely get your hands on this fight and watch it. You will absolutely not be disappointed with either fight on this card. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about this weekend's HBO card. We're going to talk about Terrence Crawford and Dirijan, and we'll talk about what's next for Sergey Kovalev and for Andre Ward, and it might not be all that palatable to those of you out there who don't know what that answer is. We will be back on the other side of the break right here on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. We haven't touched on this yet, although it basically does overshadow everything else that happened in the sport of boxing over the weekend, and that is the tragedy that has basically unfolded with Pritchard Colon after PBC on NBC. Of course, he took on Terrell Williams in that fight, has slipped into a coma. Morgan, I guess the latest that we had heard is that he is moving to some extent now.
Yeah, you have to... Colon's family is taking control of the flow of information.
As they should.
This, and they're trying to direct everyone to the Facebook page. They keep saying, well, don't listen to rumors. Just come back to the Facebook page. We'll tell you what's happening. So his brother has said, they're still hosting like prayer circles, but the brother has said the prayers are working, and that Colon has been able to move his hands and his feet. But it's it's a reminder, one of why, like, when you hear us talk about boxing, you'll never will you hear either of us call like a fighter a coward.
Yeah, or say he's ducking someone or anything like that.
And this goes back to the Lucas Matisse discussion where people called him a quitter. Mm-hmm. Well, these guys here, 4-hour entertainment, subject themselves to a level of danger that most of us will never know.
In any walk of life, anything that we do will not be as dangerous as this.
So to call somebody a quitter or a coward is so far out of line, because the worst guy any of these guys has faced is still facing a danger that none of us will ever confront.
Even if they take one punch.
In our lives.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is, every fighter knows this can happen. It might not be front of mind. It can't be front of mind, because if it's front of mind, you'll never do it. But every fighter knows it can happen. They know it can happen to the other guy. They know it can happen to them. In these stories, for everyone that ends well, like a Chris Johnson or a Joe Macy, guys who recover from a subdural hematoma and still lead more or less normal lives without boxing, there is a Gerald McClelland. There's a Kid Hakeem.
Magomed. Yeah.
Yes. And this is, if you're the guy on YouTube commenting, if you're the guy on Twitter who's about to call a fighter a coward or a quitter, you know what? Think twice.
Well, I did want to bring that up because that actually did present itself in this fight. Before we knew what the results was or the condition, that Pritchard Colon was in, You can go on YouTube right now, and there were people who quickly uploaded fan-made videos.
Yes.
With titles like Pritchard Colon, did he quit, or was it, did he quit, or was just disqualified?
Did he quit? Well, if he
did, he did it for a really friggin' good reason.
Right.
And that just shows, don't post stuff like that. And if you are going to post stuff like that, wait until you know the condition at the very least. I'm asking you not to do it at all, but if you really are that kind of guy and you want to hurl stuff like that at fighters, wait until you know that the guy's not in the emergency room.
Because I defy any of you to keep working, to continue at your job like it's normal while your brain is bleeding.
Right.
Because I will tell you right now, if my finger is bleeding, I'm not going back to work. I'm not typing anything with a bleeding finger. Yet I'm gonna pass judgment, make a value judgment on a guy whose brain is bleeding. Oh, he quit. And again, maybe you don't know his brain is bleeding, but don't assume that it is, or don't assume that it isn't. Because again, this sport is tougher than anything any of us will ever experience. And the fact that these guys choose to do this for a living, take the risk to do this for a living, tells you they're not cowards. Tells you they're not quitters. I've never been in a professional prize fight. I've sparred with guys who are like me, that know their way around boxing, but are by no means national class, by no means professionals.
And we all know we have to go back to work on Monday too. So there is like a level that you don't create. When I spar, we're not gonna destroy one another either. There's a limit,
and that alone is that's enough for me.
Yeah,
that's enough for me, and I don't need to knowingly, willingly risk my life, and at the same time, just the punches I've tasted are enough to let me know that these guys that do this for a living are tougher than I'll ever be, and you'll never catch me calling somebody a quitter, or a coward, or a wimp, or anything like that, because that's not at all what it is.
And that, I think, is the appropriate discussion to come out of this. I mean, there should always be a discussion about how to make boxing safer, and that's always going to loom overhead. But I don't think it's appropriate right now, given Pritchard's condition, to be talking about how the corner handled it, his father, because we have to respect the fact that they're grieving. Their son is currently in a coma, and they're dealing with something right now. And also, I was chatting with Paulie Malignaggi over the weekend too, and even he said, even though Colon, and a lot of people point to the fact that Colon came to the corner and said, hey, I feel dizzy right now. The corner knows their fighter too, and that's not always a sign. It could have meant a lot of things.
Yes.
It could have meant that he was dehydrated. We know that Colon liked to cut a whole lot of weight before fights. It could have meant a lot of things. It wasn't necessarily recklessness on the corner's part, and we have seen that sometimes. Yes. When a fighter says like my head hurts or something, it's time to pull him out. But there was no the corner couldn't have known it was going to wind up this way. And although I don't think the referee Cooper did the best job in this fight, I also don't think that it was on the highest level of chippy craziness that I've ever seen in a boxing ring either. So I think that the discussion that comes out of this immediately should be about respecting the fighter and the danger that they put themselves in, and not hurling blame at anyone right now.
But at the same time, often there are systemic issues that make these things happen. And you know what? Hydration is a big one. But I haven't been there to investigate these things.
Yeah, I don't know the condition he was in.
Myself.
Exactly, yeah.
But at the same time, you hear it a lot. Again, we talked to Chris Johnson. He said, when I suffered that injury against Antonio Tarver, the big thing that was working against me was dehydration. I had to cut a bunch of weight just to get into the ring. And I don't know what Colon's weight cut was for this fight. It might be probably is worth looking into. And in boxing as a sport, as much as I deride the UFC, for cutting all kinds of safety corners and being really lax with
fighter generosity corners.
Yes, generosity corners, and being really lax with its doping control. The shift in weight classes that comes with outlawing IVs isn't necessarily safe unless it forces fighters, because if it moves everyone up a weight class, then it's safer, because now I'm not going to lose 20 pounds in a day knowing I can gain 20 pounds back overnight. And people have to be much smarter about how they cut weight. because, again, and I'm not a doctor, but I've talked to enough people to know that entering the ring dehydrated is dangerous in any number of ways, and this might be a manifestation of that.
Yeah, and we're not going to pat the WBC on the back a whole lot on this program, but one thing they do, and they do a lot to exploit fighters, but having those mandatory weigh-ins at 30 days, 15 days and whatnot is certainly a good idea. And again, it might have nothing to do with this fight, but obviously a tragedy in Fairfax, and we hope the very best for Pritchard Colon and his family. But on the other side of the break, we'll be back. We'll talk about what's happening this weekend on HBO. We're going to head to Omaha, Terrence Crawford and Deary Jean. We'll talk about that when we come back on Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Welcome back to Fight Network Boxing Weekly. Corey Erdman and Morgan Campbell here with you. Listen, we're not going to be able to get to everything that we promised we would get to. That's just what happens when you have a 47-ish minute time window. But we did want to mention Terrence Crawford taking on Deary Jean this weekend on HBO. Another look at one of the 10 best fighters in the world in Terrence Crawford. I feel bad for Deary Jean because he is a really talented fighter, and he runs up against Lamont Peterson, where in the early half of that fight, you see the skill that he has, and then just didn't quite have the experience to adapt down the stretch the way that Lamont Peterson did, and he took over. I fear that he's going to run into the very same thing and a really bad physical matchup against Terrence Crawford.
Yeah, this is... Jean gets a very limited number of opportunities in the spotlight, and both times he's kind of like, not just the B-side, but a long way on the B-side. And he might go out, lose, get outclassed, and it's not going to give people an indication of what he's really capable of, because again, when you're up against one of the top 4 or 5 pound for pound fighters in the world, not a lot of things to do other than lose.
Yep. And right before that, he runs again into Lamont Peterson, who at the time was probably the best 140 pounder in the world as well. All right, we do want to get to our YouTube picks because we do promise that every single week. I'm going to go ahead and go first. This week, I want you guys to go out and watch Frank the Animal Fletcher take on Clint the Sheriff Jackson in a TV classic from 1982. This one is absolutely insane. The action is fantastic, and keep an eye out for the Animal's mom, who is also fantastic entertainment in the crowd every single time that Frank fought. And once you're done with that, just go down the rabbit hole and watch any Frank Fletcher fight that you can find. Morgan, what do you have?
I'm going to recommend Meldrick Taylor. It was Meldrick Taylor's 49th birthday yesterday. What would be the date? The 19th?
Yes. Yep.
October 19th. Happy birthday to Meldrick Taylor. And when we talk about Meldrick Taylor, we always talk about the loss to Chavez, as if that's the only thing he did in his whole career. Before he lost to Chavez, he won a bunch of it because he was a champion going into that fight. Meldrick Taylor versus James Buddy McGirt.
Yes.
From, I think, September of 1988. You talk about a punch. You talk about a fight with a lot of punches. That fight. And you guys haven't seen fast hands. You think Mayweather's fast. You think Pacquiao's fast. You have not seen fast hands until you've seen Meldrick Taylor in full flight. And try to watch the version where they're in the locker room with Taylor and George Benton before the fight.
Yeah.
Because Benton talks about employing the shoulder roll, the Philly shell, just as a tactic, not as the only stance, not as the only posture he's going to use, but just as something to throw at Buddy McGirt every now and then. Watch that fight. Action, speed, tactics, peak Meldrick Taylor.
At absolute hyperspeed. You might need the slow down version with piano music if you want to understand what happens in that fight. All right, that is all the time we have for today's program. Morgan, go ahead and ring that bell. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week.